Alright, let's see how long this video is gonna be. So I have two articles, but they're both from ProPublica. So, like I said, who knows how long this video is gonna go. Alright, my first one deals with immigration. Details of DHS agreement reveal risk of Trump administration's use of Social Security data for voter citizenship checks. Because what could possibly go wrong with getting everybody's Social Security data? Anyway, this year, when states began using an expanded Department of Homeland Security system to check their voter rolls for non-citizens, it was supposed to validate the Trump administration's push to harness data from across federal agencies to expose illicit voting and stiffen immigration enforcement. DHS had recently incorporated confidential data from the Social Security Administration on hundreds of millions of additional people into the tool known as the Systematic Alien Verification for Entitlements, or SAVE system. The added information allowed the system to perform bulk searches using Social Security numbers for the first time. The initial results, however, didn't exactly back up President Donald Trump's contention that non-citizen voting is widespread, which people in the know have been saying that multiple times. But no, there's just something about that Republicans refuse to accept that this isn't a thing. Texas identified 2,724 potential non-citizens on its rolls, or about 15,000%. For people who like to see it, that is 0.015. 15,000%. How is this a problem? All right. On its rolls, about 15,000 of the state's 18 million registered voters. Louisiana found 390 among 2.8 million registered voters, a rate of about 14,000%. So we're gotten a little more fraud there. What the heck are we doing here? But then again, this is the same party that is attacking like 1% of the population that identify as being trans. So yeah, they attack the small number of people because obviously, you know, they're the big issue. Anyway, instead, experts say the sweeping data sharing agreement authorizing DHS to merge Social Security data into SAVE could threaten Americans' privacy and lead to errors that disenfranchise legitimate voters, which I'm sure was the plan all along. The details of the agreement, which haven't previously been reported, show it contains alarmingly few guardrails to ensure accuracy and scant specifics on how the data will be kept secure. Election and privacy lawyers had reviewed it say. Further, it explicitly does not bar DHS from deploying the SSA data for other purposes, including immigration enforcement, which I'm pretty sure again was the point. They want to disenfranchise legitimate voters, but they also want to use it to go after immigration. Because, as we mentioned in a previous video concerning this, Stephen Miller doesn't care if you're a citizen. If you're non-white, you do not belong here. So anyway, the fact that, that there aren't any specifics on anything about the data shouldn't surprise you. This administration just does what they want, and they'll figure out the rest later. Because they don't have a legitimate reason for doing this. They're doing this because they want to go after people they don't like. Whatever that happens to be. Anyway, experts have raised similar concerns about other parts of the Trump administration's data pooling drive, which has sought to tap all sorts of traditionally tightly controlled federal information, even tax data. Until this year, SAVE contained information only on immigrants who'd had contact with DHS, such as those with permanent resident status and had been assigned immigration identification numbers. State and local officials typically use the system to verify immigrant status when they applied for benefits such as SNAP, or to check, one by one, whether individuals who were registered to vote were citizens. So, again, this was never about going after undocumented immigrants. They are going after legal immigrants as well. And I'm pretty sure they're going to only go after those that are non-white, possibly those who've spoken out against this regime. But yeah, nothing good is coming from this. Under the May 15 data sharing agreement, which was posted recently on the Social Security Administration's website, the system added information, including full Social Security numbers, on millions of Americans not in DHS databases. The combined data set joins together this information with addresses, birth dates, and criminal records, along with immigration histories. The agreement allows the SSA's data to be used for searches to check voters' citizenship, along with other authorized inquiries from federal, state, territorial, tribal, and local government agencies seeking to verify or ascertain the citizenship or immigration status of individuals within their jurisdiction. In doing these searches, SAVE stores not only the voter data that election officials uploaded, but also the outcome of their queries, according to the data sharing agreement and other documents from U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, the branch of DHS that oversees SAVE. The documents do not explain who can access this information or how it can be used. What could possibly go wrong with that? Experts say adding Social Security data to SAVE could help election officials verify en masse if voters are U.S. citizens, but it shouldn't be used to make final determinations that people aren't citizens. Because, that's totally how it's going to be used. That's because multiple audits and analysis have shown that SSA's citizenship information is often outdated or incomplete. And I think we've already have examples of out of date information being used to deport people. And it turns out that they were actually citizens by this point. All right, especially for people who became naturalized citizens. When the 2026 midterms about a year away, Karen Short, Director of Legal and Research for the League of Women Voters of the United States, said she fears the expanded use of SAVE will lead to errors. The Trump administration is hunting people to try to purge people from the rolls who are lawfully registered, and they are doing it by looking at unreliable, outdated data, Short said. Several privacy lawyers said they believe it's illegal for DHS to expand the use of SAVE without taking steps required in federal law, such as issuing a system of records notice to inform the public how the additional data will be collected, stored, and used. Last month, advocacy groups sued the federal government, alleging that its expansion of SAVE and other data consolidation efforts violate the Privacy Act, a federal law that prohibits public agencies from misusing private information. Wait, you think that these people give a shit about what the federal law says? That is so quaint. Officials at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services declined to answer questions from ProPublica. Well, that's never a good sign. In a filing responding to the advocacy group's lawsuit, federal officials said that another statute, the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996, explicitly allows information sharing to verify citizenship status, and that agencies would exercise caution in determining whether voters are non-citizens. There is zero basis to assume that state officials have any interest in haphazardly and unlawfully removing large numbers of U.S. citizens from their voter rolls, and no credible evidence that any such thing has happened or is going to happen anytime soon, the filing says. Still, Leland Dudek, acting SSA commissioner until early May, told ProPublica he doesn't trust that DHS will accurately flag non-citizens as officials tried to cross-match data and files from multiple systems. Of course you don't trust DHS. This is the same group headed by Gestapo Barbie, who is trying to round up as many people as she can. And oops, if we add a U.S. citizen, well, we'll eventually straighten it out. I actually just read, this is a little bit of karma. I just read that someone who used to work for Trump was mistakenly deported to Mexico. So, karma. I mean, I feel sorry for the guy. I mean, I doubt that just because he worked for Trump, he actually voted for him. So I'm not going to say that, I feel sorry, that I feel, schadenfreude for the guy. But yeah, it tells you exactly who Trump is. All right. They're probably going to make some massive mistakes, he said. This summer, the Justice Department started demanding access to state voter registration lists, saying this was necessary to ensure compliance with federal voter roll maintenance laws. The agency has filed lawsuits against a number of states that have refused to comply. Some of the states that have refused to provide voters private information directly to the Justice Department have entered into agreements with DHS under which they upload that same information into the SAVE system. So they're getting the information regardless. According to a document obtained by the ACLU, which sued the administration for SAVE-related records, a growing number of states are signing agreements with DHS to use SAVE to vet voter rolls. 10 states have signed such agreements coming into 2025. As of July, another 10 had signed on, the document shows. As Council for Protect Democracy, a nonprofit voting rights group, Naomi Gillens specializes in issues related to privacy and technology. Gillen said it's important for Americans to consider if they want the government, including future administrations, not just this one, to have so much consolidated information on them. That is a very invasive picture that starts to be painted. In one place, for every individual who lives here, whose lives here's what? Who lives here's private lives? Okay, that made no sense. All right. As of last month, Homeland Security officials had run more than 33 million voters through SAVE, USCIS told NPR. So far, the agency has declined to say publicly what the outcome of these queries have been. But the initial results are tucked into another document obtained by the ACLU. As of late August, about 96.3% of the voters checked in the SAVE system were identified by the system as U.S. citizens. For an additional 3.1% of voters, the system either couldn't find them or needed more information to determine their citizenship status. About 0.5% of voters checked had died, the system found, and 0.4% showed up as non-citizens. I hope you're hearing this. 0.04%. Not a lot. So the system has been working. We didn't need to do all this additional shit. According to copies of 12 state agreements with DHS obtained by the ACLU and reviewed by ProPublica, election officials are required to take additional steps to verify SAVE results for voters the system identifies as other than U.S. citizens. Then, if SAVE still can't verify citizenship, the election officials must contact the registrant or registered voter to obtain proof of citizenship. Dudek and Kathleen Romig, a former Social Security official who now works at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, worry even those steps won't be enough to prevent mismatches from happening. Again, that's probably the point. People's names can be misspelled or listed differently in the various data sets. And let's not get into the fact that women get married and take on their husband's name. Many states collect partial, not full, Social Security numbers from voters, and matches using partial numbers will be even less accurate, since many people share the same names, Dudek and Romig said. If there's a Jane Smith that's a citizen and a Jane Smith that isn't, you don't want to disenfranchise a citizen Jane Smith by accident, Romig said. Federal officials aren't done adding data to SAVE. Next up, according to a recent USCIS presentation to election officials shared with ProPublica, passport information from the State Department. The State Department referred ProPublica's request for comment to DHS, which did not respond. Well, the one good thing about passport information is you literally have to be a citizen to get it. So, okay. But, Anyway, the fact that people can easily find out where everybody's been. You know, that even if you're a citizen, but you went to a bad country, you know, not a good look. Anyway, that is the end of that article. Either I'm reading faster or the ProPublica articles have gotten shorter. Anyway, next article is called God's Chief Justice. This is about a Chief Justice in North Carolina who basically is trying to make North Carolina Christian nationalist. But anyway, let's get to the article and how things are. There's a lot of similarities to what the Supreme Court is in fact doing. All right. In early 2023, Paul Newby, the Republican Chief Justice of North Carolina's Supreme Court, gave the state and the nation a demonstration of the stunning and overlooked power of his office. The previous year, the court, then majority Democrat, had outlawed partisan gerrymandering in the swing state over Newby's vehement dissent. It had ordered independent outsiders to redraw electoral maps that the GOP-controlled legislature had crafted to conservatives' advantage. Which sounds good. It should be nonpartisan. Partisan gerrymandering is not a good idea. It never was. It's becoming to the point where Democrats have to fight dirty because Republicans are fighting dirty, but in a perfect world, we wouldn't have that. The traditional ways to undo such a decision would have been for the legislature to pass a new law that made gerrymandering legal or for Republicans to file a lawsuit, but that would have taken months or years. Newby cleared a way to get there sooner, well before the crucial 2024 election. In January, once two newly elected Republican justices were sworn in, giving the party a 5-2 majority, GOP lawmakers quickly filed a petition asking the Supreme Court to rehear the gerrymandering case. Such do-overs are rare. Since 1993, the court had granted only 2 out of 214 petitions for rehearings, both to redress narrow errors, not differences in interpreting North Carolina's Constitution. The lawyers who'd won the gerrymandering case were incredulous. We were like, they can't possibly do this, said Jeff LaPerfido, the chief counsel for voting rights at the Southern Coalition for Social Justice. Can they revisit their opinions when the ink is barely dry? Under Newby's leadership, they did. Behind the closed doors of the courthouse, he set aside decades of institutional precedent by not gathering the court's 7 justices to debate the legislature's request in person, as chief justices had historically done for important matters. Instead, in early February, Justice Phil Berger Jr., Newby's right-hand man and presumed heir on the court, circulated a draft of a special order agreeing to the rehearing. Sources familiar with the matter said. Berger's accompanying message made clear there would be no debate. Rather, he instructed his colleagues to vote by email, giving them just over 24 hours to respond. The court's conservatives approved the order within about an hour. Its 2 liberal justices, consigned to irrelevance, worked through the night with their clerks to complete a dissent by the deadline. The pair were allowed little additional input when the justices met about a month and a half later in their elegant wood-paneled conference room to reach a decision on the case. After what a court staffer present that day called a notably short conference, Newby and his allies emerged victorious. Newby then wrote a majority opinion declaring that partisan gerrymandering was legal and that the Democrat-led court had unconstitutionally infringed on the legislature's prerogative to create electoral maps. The decision freed GOP lawmakers to toss out electoral maps that had produced an evenly split North Carolina congressional delegation in 2022, reflecting the state's balanced electorate. In 2024, the state sent 10 Republicans and 4 Democrats to Congress, a 6-seat swing that enabled the GOP to take control of the U.S. House of Representatives and handed Republicans, led by President Donald Trump, control of every branch of the federal government. The gerrymandering push isn't finished. This month, North Carolina Republican lawmakers passed a redistricting bill designed to give the party an additional congressional seat in the 2026 election. And this is where California comes in, where they are hoping that Prop 50 is passed so they can do the same thing. Redistrict, so in the middle of a cycle, so they can get more Democratic seats to hopefully balance out what the Republicans are doing. I still would love if this massively backfired against Republicans and that those seats that they were so sure would go Republican went Democrat. I would love that. Few beyond North Carolina's borders grasp the outsized role Newby has played in transforming the state's top court from a relatively harmonious judicial backwater to a frontline partisan battleground since his election in 2004. Under North Carolina's Constitution, Supreme Court justices are charged with upholding the independence and impartiality of the courts, applying laws fairly, and ensuring all citizens get treated equally. Yet for years, his critics charge, Newby has worked to erode barriers to politicalization. He pushed to make judicial elections in North Carolina, once a national leader in minimizing political influence on judges, explicitly partisan, and to get rid of public financing, leaving candidates more dependent on dark money. Since Newby's allies in the legislature shepherded through laws enacting those changes, judicial campaigns have become vicious, high-dollar gunfights that have produced an increasingly polarized court dominated by hard-right conservatives. Because that's what we want. We want a judge that will... it used to be that Republicans... I remember when Republicans yowled about activist judges, and now here they are basically saying the quiet part out loud. They want activist judges, as long as they're activist towards what they want. As Chief Justice, he and courts under him have consistently backed initiative by Republican lawmakers to strip power away from North Carolina's governor, thwarting the will of voters who have chosen Democrats to lead the state since 2016. He also used his extensive executive authority to transform the court system according to his political views, such as by doing away with diversity initiatives. Under his leadership, some liberal and LGBTQ+ employees have been replaced with conservatives. A devout Christian and church leader, he speaks openly about his faith, about how his faith has shaped his jurisprudence and administration of the courts. Okay. First off, I can relate to the legislature trying to strip power away from the governor. I live in Wisconsin, and the Republican legislature when Scott Walker was governor, they gave him all these additional powers. The second Tony Evers either looked like he was going to win or did win. I'm unsure of the timeline. Those same Republicans all of a sudden decided that the governor has too much power. We need to strip him of his power. Simply because a Democrat won. And, seriously, doing away with diversity initiatives, doesn't that sound familiar? That's what the Supreme Court is doing. That is what Trump is trying to do, and actually succeeding. Because they're fucking racists. They can't handle that anyone but straight white Christian males can actually accomplish anything. According to former justices, judges, and Republicans seeking to be judicial candidates, Newby acts more like a political operator than an independent jurist. He's packed higher and lower courts with former clerks and mentees whom he's cultivated at his Bible study, prayer breakfast, and similar events. His political muscle is backed by his families. His wife is a major GOP donor, and one of his daughters, who is head of finance for the state Republican Party, has managed judicial campaigns. So, yeah, I don't see anything corruptive about that. Okay. He's supporting changes to judicial oversight, watering it down and bringing it under his court's control, making himself and his fellow judges less publicly accountable. The man Newby replaced on North Carolina's Supreme Court, Bob Orr, said his successor has become the model for a new, more politically active kind of judge who has reshaped the court system according to his views. Without question, Chief Justice Newby has emerged over the past 20 years as one of the most influential judicial officials in modern North Carolina history, said Orr, a former Republican who's been an outspoken critic of the party's changes under Trump. The effect has been that the conservative legislative agenda had been virtually unchecked by the courts, allowing the sweeping implementation of conservative priorities. And like I said, if it ever gets to the point again where Democrats are in charge, suddenly, this happened under Biden. Think about it. The courts decided that it was overreach of the executive to forgive student loans. And now they're giving carte blanche to Trump to do literally anything. Newby declined multiple interview requests from ProPublica and even had a reporter escorted out of a judicial conference to avoid questions. He also did not answer detailed written questions. The court system's communications director and media team did not respond to multiple requests for comment or detailed written question. Of course not, because they know they can't defend what they're doing. When ProPublica emailed questions to Newby's daughter, the North Carolina Republican Party's communications director, Matt Mercer, responded, writing that ProPublica was waging a jihad against NC Republicans, which would not be met with dignifying any comments whatsoever. Right. Does this douche know what words mean? Actually, I'm convinced that in order to be a Republican, you're not allowed to know what words mean. I'm sure you're aware of our connections with the Trump administration, and I'm sure they would be interested in this matter, Mercer said in his email. I would strongly suggest dropping the story. To tell Newby's story, ProPublica interviewed over 70 people who know him professionally or personally, including former North Carolina justices and judges, lawmakers, longtime friends, and family members. Many requested anonymity, saying they feared that he or his proxies would retaliate against them through the court's oversight system, the State Bar Association, or the influence he wields more broadly. Because nothing says that you are a fair and impartial judge than fearing retaliation from him. Sounds more like a mob boss. We reviewed court documents, ethics disclosure forms, Newby's calendars, Supreme Court minutes, and a portion of his emails obtained via public records requests. We also drew on Newby's own words from dozens of hours of recordings of speeches he's made on the campaign trail and to conservative political groups, as well as interviews he's given to right-wing and Christian media outlets. In these venues, he has described his work on the Supreme Court as apolitical and designed to undo the excesses of liberal activist judges. He has said repeatedly that he believes God has called him to lead the court and once described his mission as delivering biblical justice, equal justice for all. Which one? Is it biblical justice or equal justice? Let me move this. Because you can't have both. Some North Carolina conservatives see Newby as something close to a hero, undoing years of harm inflicted by Democrats when they dominated the legislature and the courts. And I would love to know what harm that was. I think Chief Justice Newby has been a great justice, said U.S. Senator Tom Tillis, a Republican from North Carolina, who forged a relationship with Newby as a leader in the state legislature. If Democrats are complaining about what Justice Newby is doing, they ought to look back at what happened when they had the votes to change things. Is this basically saying, I'm sorry I shot you, you made me do it? Is that the vibe I'm getting here? As much as Newby's triumphs reflect his own relentless crusade, they also reflect years of trench warfare by the conservative legal movement. For the last generation, its donors have poured vast amounts of money into flipping state Supreme Courts to Republican control, successfully capturing the majority of them across America. While most attention has focused on the right-wing power brokers shaping the U.S. Supreme Court, state courts hear about 95% of the cases in the country, and they increasingly have become the final word on civil rights, abortion rights, gay and trans rights, and especially voting rights. North Carolina has been at the forefront of this work. Douglas Keith, Deputy Director of the Judicial Program at the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU Law, has criticized the changes made under Newby called North Carolina the epicenter of the multi-front effort to shape state Supreme Courts by conservatives. In recent years, Democrats have countered in a handful of states, notably Wisconsin, where the party regained a Supreme Court majority in 2023 after a decade and a half. Yeah, that was awesome. Hopefully we can keep it. The Wisconsin court, in contrast to its counterpart in North Carolina, has thus far rejected efforts aimed at redistricting the state to add Democratic congressional seats. Normally I would applaud them for that, but considering the dire situation we are in with this Republican Party, I would say go for it, but I also understand why they're not. They still desperately want to play by the rules. Unfortunately, they're going up against someone who doesn't want to play by the rules. At the same time, the Newby-led Supreme Court cleared the path for re-gerrymandered electoral maps. It used identical tactics to reverse another decision made by its predecessor on voting rights. In that case, the court reinstated a law requiring that voters show photo ID to cast ballots, writing that our state's courts follow the law, not the political winds of the day. And that is the law here in Wisconsin, too. So, Gene Nickel, a professor of constitutional law at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, said Newby had essentially turned the court into an arm of the Republican Party. Huh, sounds like the U.S. Supreme Court. Newby, he said, has become the Chief Justice who destroyed the North Carolina Supreme Court as an impartial institution. All right, so this is a long article. I guess not all ProPublica articles are long. When Newby announced he was running for a seat on North Carolina's Supreme Court in the 2004 election, it seemed like a foolhardy choice. He jumped into an 8-way race that featured well-known judges from both parties. Newby, then 49, he's 70 now, had virtually no public profile and no judicial experience, having spent nearly the previous 2 decades as a federal prosecutor in North Carolina's Eastern District. There was no case that he handled that stands out in my memory, said Janice Mackenzie Cole, who was Newby's boss from 1994 to 2001 when she was the district's U.S. attorney. Nothing made him seem like he'd be the Chief Justice of the state. Newby believed that God had called him to serve. Upset by what he saw as liberal overreach, particularly a federal appeals court ruling that deemed the Pledge of Allegiance unconstitutional because the words "one nation under God" violated the separation between church and state, he felt compelled to enter electoral politics. I had a sense in my heart that God was saying maybe I should run, he recalled in 2024 on the Think Biblically podcast. Okay. For those who don't know history, one nation under God was added to the pledge. I think it was during the Red Scare of the 50s to separate us from the godless communists. Because obviously, either you believe in God or you're a communist. It couldn't possibly be that atheists aren't communists or anything. So anyway, those close to Newby say his faith had fueled his political ambition, impelling him to defend what he sees as biblically based American systems from secular attacks. If you're going to really be claim to be very faithful and be a certain type of Christian, that's fine. But once you force other people to be that type of Christian, no, that's not how any of this works. I mean, there are how many different denominations of Christianity? So most Christians wouldn't want to do what you're forcing them to do. This has nothing to do with just non-Christians. He's a man of deep traditional conservative values, said Pat McCrory, the former governor of North Carolina, who's a childhood friend of Newby's and attends a regular Bible study with him. He's not a hypocrite saying one thing and doing another. He lives what he believes. Which is fine, as long as you don't force everybody in the state to live as you believe. Because your belief is your own. You do not get to tell other people how to live. That's just not how this works. Newby has a deep commitment to charitable works, yet his tendency to see people as either with him or against God has at times led to conflicts with political allies, associates, and even relatives. That includes 2 of his 4 children, from whom he's distanced over issues of politics and sexuality. Newby was steeped in religion from early childhood. He grew up a poor little nobody, as he described it, in Jamestown, a one traffic light town in North Carolina's agricultural Piedmont. His mother was a school teacher, and his father operated a linotype when he wasn't unemployed. One of his first memories is of them on their knees praying, he said in a speech at the National Day of Prayer in Washington, D.C. In high school and at Duke University, where he enrolled in 1973, he was known for being reserved, serious, and academically accomplished, even as a member of a college fraternity that multiple former brothers described with references to Animal House. Okay. Newby has said he had a crisis of faith at Duke when a professor challenged the literal truth of the Bible and he felt unprepared to defend it. He would later call his years at the college and then the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill's law school a failed attempt to indoctrinate me with liberal and secular beliefs. Okay. Now, before I continue, I should really explain secular. Secular does not mean atheist, first off, because a lot of people seem to confuse the two, which is annoying. Secular just accepts that not everybody believes like you. So we should have an environment where everyone is free to believe how they want to believe. If you're Christian and you believe in such and such, great. Not all Christians believe that, and non-Christians don't have to believe the same thing you do. And everybody gets to believe what they want. That is literally all it says. All right. Near the end of law school, after well-known evangelist, Josh McDowell directed Newby to read his book, More Than a Carpenter, an argument for the historical reality of Jesus. Newby was born again. Sounds like he was pretty into the weeds anyway, but okay. He became more overt about his faith, praying in public, and weaving Bible quotations into speeches. He still gives a copy of the book to each of his interns and law clerks. In 1983, he married Taller Macon Tucker, a woman with a similarly deep investment in Christianity, whom he had met in law school. I would think that then she wouldn't be in law school, but okay. The match drastically transformed his fortunes. Macon was part of a prominent North Carolina family that had become wealthy in banking and furniture stores and was deeply involved in conservative politics. Macon, who'd held a prestigious clerkship with the North Carolina Court of Appeals, did not continue her legal career. She did not respond to questions from ProPublica for this article. Well, there's a shock. So maybe it was just I'll do this until I manage to find a husband and then I'll be a housewife. Which I guess is fine, but that's a lot of money to spend just in the hopes that you'll end up married and making babies. But okay. Over the next decade, Newby and his wife adopted 3 children. Oh. So she didn't even make babies. She adopted them. I wonder what his Bible says about that. I'm just thinking because, where was it? Arkansas that had a problem with IVF? Anyway. In September 1994, they brought home a 4th child, a baby girl, to their 2-story colonial in Raleigh. Its mailbox decorated with a pink bow, only to be hit with a court order to relinquish her. What the heck? There's a story here. The child's mother, I can talk, Melody Barnes, had split from her boyfriend after getting pregnant and, with the help of a Christian anti-abortion network, moved to Oregon, which then allowed mothers to put babies up for adoption without their father's consent. Barnes's ex disputed the adoption, obtaining a restraining order to halt the process. According to news reports, the Newbys and their lawyer were notified of this before the birth, but went forward anyway. They took custody just after the baby was born, christening the little girl Sarah Frances Newby. To thank Barnes, the Newbys gave her a gold key charm to symbolize what she says they called her second virginity, which they suggested she save for her future husband. Okay. 2 weeks later, when a court ordered the Newbys to return the child to her father, they instead sought to give the baby to Barnes, someone who shared their evangelical beliefs. Why would they give the baby back to the birth mother who didn't want the baby to begin with? All right. They called me and said, "You should come get the baby because you'll have a better chance of winning a custody battle than we will," Barnes recalled. The Newbys turned the baby over to Barnes in the parking lot of the Raleigh airport, along with diapers and a car seat. Soon after, a court order compelled Barnes to give the baby to her father. The Newbys and the baby's father didn't respond to questions from ProPublica about the case. Losing the baby was traumatic, according to multiple family members and a person who attended Bible study with Macon. "Oh, but I thought that you thought that everything was God's plan. So how could this be traumatic?" The Newbys went on to start 2 adoption agencies, including the Amazing Grace Adoptions, an agency whose mission was to place children in Christian homes and save babies from abortion. So, you're insufferable. Gee, wouldn't have guessed that. They eventually adopted another baby girl whom they also named Sarah Frances. Okay, that's fair. That is far less creepy than back in, the 1700s, maybe earlier, that, because infant mortality was so high that they would recycle names. So this is far less creepy. Far less creepy. All right. Anyway. Now, the only problem with putting them into Christian homes, and I put that in quotes because I'm sure it has to be a specific type of Christian, not just any old Christian, because not all Christians are horrible bigots. I'm pretty sure that it's a certain type of Christian, and, that's fine, but then we get into the LGBT plus of it all, and when Newby ran for the Supreme Court in 2004, he focused on turning out church and homeschool communities, voters to whom he had deep ties. A campaign bio highlighted his work to facilitate Christian adoptions and other faith-related activities. Although North Carolina is among the states that elect Supreme Court justices, elsewhere they're appointed. I thought they were elected everywhere, but okay. Learn something new every day. State law at the time dictated that the judicial races were nonpartisan, as it is in Wisconsin. Newby, determined to distinguish himself in a crowded field, nonetheless sought and got the endorsement of the state Republican Party, meeting with each member of the executive committee personally and emphasizing his conservative beliefs, which is also which is true of Wisconsin. It's only a technicality that it's nonpartisan. was savvy politics, a Republican former state official said, suggesting that it helped Newby win what was essentially a behind-the-scenes primary over candidates who had stronger credentials. Because Newby was working as a federal prosecutor at the time, his critics saw his tactics as more troubling and possibly illegal. Well, we've learned that Republicans don't care about illegality unless it's against them. Another conservative candidate in the race, Rachel Hunter, accused him of violating the Hatch Act, which bars federal employees from being candidates in partisan elections. The U.S. Office of Special Counsel, which enforces the Hatch Act, had warned that seeking an endorsement in a nonpartisan race can make it partisan. Oh, duh. It speaks to someone who's so stupid they don't know the rules, Hunter told ProPublica, or someone who's so malevolent they don't care. I'm going to go with the latter. He is so far up his own butt that he thinks that he can get away with anything because God called him. It just amazes me how much people ascribe to God that just happens to fit with their beliefs. Newby denied he'd broken the law. The U.S. Office of Special Counsel opened an investigation but took no public action against Newby. It's not clear why. The office didn't answer questions from ProPublica about the case and declined to release the investigative file, citing privacy laws. The controversy didn't thwart Newby's otherwise low-budget, low-tech campaign. He spent a grand total of $170,000, mostly on direct mailers. Make and bought stamps and made copies. Boosted by the Christian right, he won his first 8-year term on North Carolina's highest court with about 23% of the vote, finishing a few percentage points ahead of Hunter and another candidate. And that's another sad thing about our elections. Nobody should be winning elections with 23% of the freaking vote. I think Paul really believed that God wanted him to fill that role, said Bradley Byrne, a Republican former congressman from Alabama who is Newby's fraternity brother at Duke and consulted with him on his political runs. He figured out what he needed to do to be successful, and he did it. Once Newby joined the court, it took years for him to find his footing and start transforming it into the institution it is today. When he first donned black judicial robes, he became the junior member of a collegial unit that worked hard to find consensus, former justices said. In conferences to decide cases, they'd sometimes pass around whimsical props like a clothespin to signal members to hold their noses and vote unanimously to project institutional solidarity. They often ate together at a family-run diner near the Capitol, following the Chief Justice to their regular table and seating themselves in orders of seniority. Like ducklings following their mother, the joke went to the legislature. Newby, as the most junior member, had to close doors and take minutes for the others. 6 of the court's 7 justices were Republicans, but most were more moderate than Newby. It sounds like you can't get more extreme. And he had little influence on their jurisprudence. He quickly gained a reputation for being uncompromising, arm-twisting, in one former colleague's words. He would not try to find common ground, one former justice complained. Another warned Newby that information about his confrontational behavior would be leaked to the newspapers if he didn't stop. Newby toned it down and bided his time. His 2012 bid for re-election turned into a game-changer, a crucial step both in pushing the court's conservatives further to the right and in opening it to more unchecked partisanship. Superficially, Newby's campaign seemed folksy. One of his slogans was Scooby Dooby, vote for Newby. Don't drag Scooby Doo into this. But it was backed by serious money. I mean, Scooby Doo was all about, oh, this isn't supernatural. This is just some dude pretending to be a monster. This is not what you're doing. And then, of course, there's the fact that a doobie is one of the many, many names for marijuana. So, yeah, I don't think you want to be that either. Not long before, the U.S. Supreme Court Citizens United decision had cleared the way for so-called dark money groups, which don't have to disclose their donors' identities to spend uncapped amounts to influence campaigns. Newby's opponent, Sam J. Ervin IV, the son of a federal judge and the grandson of a legendary U.S. senator, depended mostly on a $240,000 provided by North Carolina's pioneering public financing system. Ervin did not respond to a request for comment. Yes, the beginning of the end was the Citizens United decision, because we would not be nearly in the mess we're in if we didn't have to deal with dark money. A few weeks before Election Day, polls showed Ervin ahead. Then about $2 million of dark money flooded into the race in the closing stretch, according to campaign finance records and news reports. Much of it came from groups connected to the Republican State Leadership Committee, the arm of the party devoted to state races, and conservative super donor Leonardo Leo, his parents were creative, who has worked to win Republican majorities on state courts nationwide. So that's probably why Ervin doesn't want to talk about it, doesn't want to reply to ProPublica. He's probably still bitter. But I would think that would be more of an incentive to talk to the press. Oh well. The cash-funded waves of ads supporting Newby and blasting Ervin. TVs across the state blared what became known as the banjo ad, in which a country singer crooned that Newby would bring justice tough but fair. Newby won by 4%, helping Republicans keep a 4-3 edge on the court, having outspent his opponent by more than $3 million. Ensconced in another 8-year term, Newby began working with conservatives in the legislature to change judicial elections to Republicans' advantage. In 2010, a red wave had flipped the North Carolina legislature to Republican control for the first time in more than 100 years, putting Newby's allies into positions of power. His back-channel conversations with General Assembly members were openly known among court and legislative insiders, one former lawmaker said. It was like court intrigue, agreed a former justice. It was common knowledge he was down at Jones Street, home to the legislature's offices. Tillis, then Speaker of the North Carolina House, and Paul Skip Stam, then the General Assembly's majority leader, confirmed that Newby's opinion was taken into account. Judge Newby was a part of a dialogue with key lawmakers, Tillis said, not dictating changes but advocating effectively. Tillis said he didn't think Newby did anything improper. But justices typically hadn't engaged in these types of discussions for fear of tarnishing the judiciary's independence. Considering that Tillis only grew a spine when he decided to retire, and that was only a little bit, Of course, he wouldn't think he did anything improper. Most of us refrained, except, of course, Newby, another Republican former justice, said. Paul had some strong ideas about the way things ought to be, and he'd go to the General Assembly and make sure they knew what he thought. The stealth lobbying campaign proved effective. Now, if there's one thing that it used to be the norm, is that justices didn't comment on politics, especially politics that might end up before the court, but they do not comment on politics. They were as apolitical as the freaking Queen of England. Queen Elizabeth was notorious for having never voted a day in her life, because in her eyes, she would have to have conversations with the prime minister. So it would be awkward if she was having conversations with someone she didn't vote for. Anyway, in 2013, the legislature did away with public financing for judicial candidates, making them reliant on private contributions and dark money groups. Yeah, what could possibly go wrong? The move had Newby's support, according to Tillis and former justices. Research subsequently showed that when North Carolina's public financing system was in place, rulings by justices were more moderate and reflected less donor influence. Prodded by Newby, those constraints fell away. Gee, never would have saw that coming. Legislators also passed another measure Newby favored, according to lawmakers, former justices, judges, and court staffers. It cloaked investigations by the court's internal watchdog, the Judicial Standards Commission, in secrecy and gave the Supreme Court veto power on sanctions and whether cases became public. The law was passed over the objections of commission members. Stam said that the changes guarded against judges being smeared at the last minute by people filing public complaints during elections for political purposes. What? Alrighty. So the judges can make rulings and nobody can say shit about it. That's what I got from that. Newby had drawn the commission's scrutiny for engaging in activities that could cause litigants to question his impartiality, including attending a rally against same-sex marriage in his first year on the bench, which, like I mentioned before, once upon a time, you couldn't comment on politics, especially cases that might appear in your court. And let's face it, what are we doing here? A decade after the commission was made into one of the most secretive in America, the court, under Newby's leadership, would quash disciplinary actions against 2 Republican judges. They had admitted to egregious breaches of the state's judicial code, including one contributing to a defendant's death. Okay, according to sources familiar with the matter. The decisions to quash the discipline remained secret until ProPublica reported them. In 2016, Republican lawmakers handed Newby a third victory when they began phasing out nonpartisan judicial elections, according to former justices, court staff, and lawmakers. Democrats criticized the changes, but Republicans pointed out that the Supreme Court elections had become nonpartisan in the mid-1990s because Democrats, then in control of the legislature, thought that obscuring candidates' party affiliations gave Democrats an edge. I'm sorry, what? How pretzeled are your brains? It is unsavory. Some things the party Is it unsavory, some things the party did? Do we wish it was more gentlemanly? Yes, we do, said Marshall Hurley, the state Republican Party's former general counsel and a childhood friend of Newby's. But I think once both sides figured out courts can have an outsized role in issues, they realized they had to fight that fight. Newby's unwillingness to engage in political sausage-making turned him into a favorite among some state lawmakers to become the court's next Chief Justice. In 2019, the then Chief Mark Martin announced he would resign to become dean of a Virginia law school. Martin didn't respond to emailed questions from ProPublica about why he left the bench. Tradition dictated that the court's senior associate justice, Newby, be appointed to complete Martin's term. Instead, Democratic Governor Roy Cooper chose a Democrat, Sherry Beasley, who became the state's first black female Chief Justice. Newby called the decision raw partisan politics and publicly promised to challenge Beasley in 2020. He ran a bare-knuckle campaign attacking Beasley's work to start a commission to study racial bias in the court system and fighting her effort to remove a portrait that hung over the Chief Justice's chair portraying a former justice who had owned slaves. Imagine that. A black justice wouldn't be comfortable with that. Can't imagine why. Newby's family members played key roles in his push to lead the court. He'd persuaded the state Republican Party to create a fundraising committee to boost conservative candidates for court seats. His daughter Sarah, who had recently graduated from college with a degree in agriculture, was picked to run it, though Newby's disclosure forms described her previous job as ministry through horses. She more or less ran her father's 2020 race, a Republican political consultant said. Sarah Newby did not respond to requests for comment. Newby's wife, Macon, put almost $90,000 into Republican campaigns and the state GOP. She also invested in a right-wing media outlet, the North Star Journal, that reported favorably on her husband without disclosing her ownership stake, the Raleigh News and Observer reported. The then publisher of the North State Journal did not respond to the News and Observer's request for comment. He referred questions from ProPublica to the Journal, which did not respond. Still, the race was tight. On election night, Newby led by about 4,000 votes, but his margin shrank over the following month as officials continued to cure provisional ballots and conduct recounts. Macon wrote to friends asking for their prayers and helping her husband win. Oh, thank God she wasn't asking for anything better. Paul, as a believer in Christ Jesus, is clothed in the righteousness of Christ alone. Her note said, because of that, he has direct access to Almighty God to cry out for wisdom in seeking for the court to render justice. I'm going to throw up. Because I'm pretty sure it says in the Bible, no. After around 40 days and 40 nights, which Newby later described as a biblical sign, Beasley concluded the final margin was 401 votes out of around 5.4 million cast. Okay. So he's comparing his campaign to the biblical flood. Alrighty then. So now he's freaking Noah. Alright. When Newby was sworn in just after midnight on New Year's Day, he became Chief Justice of a court with a 4-3 Democratic majority, limiting his ability to shape laws in the courtroom. Still, as Chief Justice, he possessed considerable executive authority to unilaterally reshape the 7,600-person court system and moved swiftly to use it in ways that had no precedent. multiple former justices and court staffers said. Chief justices have considerable hiring and firing power, though Newby's predecessors had used it sparingly, typically replacing only a few top-level appointees. In Newby's case, his senior-level hires cleared out additional people in the court's central administrative hub, including at least 10 managers and lower-level employees, many of whom were outspoken liberals or openly LGBTQ+, current and former employees told ProPublica. They were replaced by people with conservative political connections, such as the former clerk of Newby's and attendees of his prayer group, court staffers said. Court officials didn't respond to questions from ProPublica about these steps. At the time, a court spokesperson said that Newby was bringing in an executive leadership team consistent with his vision, as other state leaders have routinely done in the past. Newby also could promote or demote judges on lower courts, deciding who served as their chiefs and held prestigious committee posts. These appointments affect crucial elements of the legal system, from the composition of court panels to policies on bail. In the past, seniority had dictated most of these choices. Newby, however, demoted or forced into retirement as many as 9 senior judges with little public explanation, according to sources familiar with the matter. All were Democrats or moderate Republicans, or had clashed personally with Newby or his allies. Among the most notable was Donna Stroud, the Republican chief judge of the Court of Appeals, whom Newby removed after she was reported to have hired a clerk favored by Democrats over one favored by a Republican justice. Stroud didn't respond to requests for comment from ProPublica. At the time, she wrote WRAL News that Newby had given her little explanation for her demotion. Sounds like we know why. Newby replaced Stroud with a close ally, Chris Dillon. Dillon did not respond to questions from ProPublica. That seems to be happening a lot. Dillon had been appointed chair of the Judicial Standards Commission just before Newby took over as Chief Justice. Newby kept him in the role, filling one of the 6 seats he controlled on the 14-member panel. Through those appointees, Newby has exercised considerable control over the commission. In 2022, after the commission's longtime director clashed with Dillon about limiting justices' political activity, she was ousted. Her replacement, Brittany Pinkham, swiftly led 2 investigations into alleged misconduct by Democratic Supreme Court Justice Anita Earls, who had spoken publicly about Newby's actions to end initiatives to address a lack of diversity in the court system. Right, because they're the bad guys. They're the ones who are doing the illegal stuff. Not the guy who is preventing people from being a justice while black or whatever. Or a woman for that matter. Newby personally encouraged at least one of the investigations ProPublica reported. Pinkham and the commission's current chair, Court of Appeals Judge Jeffrey Carpenter, didn't respond to questions from ProPublica about the cases in person or via email. Earls declined to comment on Newby's role in the commission's investigation into her conduct. Why is nobody talking about anything, is what I'd like to know. All I can think of is they're scared of Newby, which is sad. You should not be afraid of the Chief Justice. Anyway, neither investigation resulted in sanctions, but judges said that in combination with the firings and demotions, the probes conveyed a chilling message that Newby would punish those who crossed him. Sound familiar? Several judges said they were intimidated to the point that it shaped how they did their jobs. Some said they or others had felt pressure to participate in prayers Newby conducted at courthouses or conferences. Right, because separation of church and state? What separation? We should just force people to believe like me. Judges and court staffers are afraid of speaking out, said Mary Ann Talley, a judge who retired near the beginning of Newby's tenure as Chief Justice when she hit the statutory retirement age. Talley, a Democrat, said other judges had told her they were afraid of Newby retaliating against them or they would end up in front of the Judicial Standards Commission. ProPublica spoke to more than 20 current or former judges who expressed fear that Newby or his allies might seek to harm their judicial or legal careers. Again, that sounds more like a freaking mob boss than the Chief Justice of a state Supreme Court. Or any Supreme Court. Any court, for that matter. Newby didn't respond to questions about whether his actions had created a climate of fear. Of course not, because he's probably loving it. And he doesn't want to appear as douchey as he actually is. Newby's appointments affected aspects of life in North Carolina well beyond its courthouses. The state's administrative law office decided whether rules and regulations written by North Carolina agencies are in keeping with state law. Newby replaced the office's longtime head with Donald Vandervaart, a climate change skeptic and fracking proponent who served in the first Trump administration. Oh gee, what could possibly go wrong with that? During Vandervaart's tenure as chief administrative judge, which ended in July, he ruled against limits on potentially dangerous chemicals, there's a shock, in drinking water set by the state's Department of Environmental Quality. Vandervaart declined to answer questions from ProPublica about these decisions, saying he could no longer comment on the court system now that he's left. Yeah, more like he just doesn't want to, because he knows he can't defend his actions. So these guys are self-aware assholes, but they're still assholes. The 2022 election offered Newby a chance to expand his powers beyond personnel. 2 Supreme Court seats held by Democrats were up for grabs, enough to allow Republicans to regain the majority. The races drew $10.4 million in outside dark money that favored Republicans over Democrats by about 2-1, according to an analysis by the Brennan Center. It was well known within the party, former justices and other judges said, that Newby handpicked Republican judicial candidates, demanding that those vying for seats be in lockstep with his views, as one described it. In one Supreme Court race, he championed a former clerk whose career he nurtured since 2005. During Newby's tenure as Chief Justice, a cartoon has hung in the Supreme Court depicting him as Superman, surrounded by a coterie of conservative appellate justices, caricatured as other members of DC Comics' Justice League. Oh, gag. I really wonder what Newby thought of the new Superman movie. It's a gag, but one that hints at his dead serious ambition to build a lasting judicial dynasty. Berger, the son of North Carolina's Republican Senate president, who's described himself as Newby's wingman, appears as Batman. That's an insult to Batman, but Newby is an insult to Superman, so. Dylan, Newby's pick to head the Court of Appeals, is Aquaman. Okay. In November 2022, Newby took a giant leap toward realizing this vision. North Carolina Democrats gained seats in Congress that year, but Newby's candidates ran sophisticated, well-financed campaigns and crushed their Democratic opponents. With Newby leading the way, Republicans had swept the last 14 appellate judicial elections, cementing their dominance of the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court. In late January 2023, the day after the legislature petitioned the Supreme Court to rehear the gerrymandering case, Newby and three of his colleagues, all Republicans, flew to Honolulu. Alrighty. They made the trip to attend a conference organized by George Mason University's Antonin Scalia Law School. Oh, gee, okay. Which mega donors like Leo had turned into a crucial pipeline and conveyor for the conservative legal movement. I thought that was just the Federalist Society, but I guess I have to get them from somewhere. Newby's presence at the week-long gathering held at the Royal Hawaiian Resort, a pricey beachfront hotel known as the Pink Palace of the Pacific, reflected his growing national stature. According to emails ProPublica obtained through a public records request, he'd been personally invited to participate in school events by Donald Cocken, the director of the school's Law and Economics Center. They'd met the previous August at a summit for the Federalist Society, the influential conservative legal group. Records from Scalia Law School, Records from Scalia Law show the school spent about $14,000 to cover expenses for Newby and the others. They went to lectures on conservative legal principles in the mornings, then enjoyed local attractions from hot tubbing to hiking the rest of the day, according to a ProPublica reporter who was at the event. On the final day, they attended an outdoor banquet lit by tiki torches that featured a whole roasted luau pig. This can't be legal. Only one of the four, Berger, disclosed the trip in their annual judicial ethics forms, though the form directs judges to report gifts of over $500. Berger did not respond to requests for comment from ProPublica. Seriously, everybody is scared of Newby. At least he has ethics. I'm still not convinced that was legal, but at least it was reported by one of them. Experts said that only the Judicial Standards Commission could definitively determine if Newby had violated disclosure rules in this instance. Really? The commission declined to answer detailed questions from ProPublica beyond directing a reporter to the Code of Judicial Conduct and Information on its website. Newby didn't respond to questions from ProPublica about the trip or why he didn't report it. Again, shocking. Ethics experts said Newby has made a habit of flouting North Carolina's rules on judicial conduct, a pattern startling in the state's highest-ranking jurist. Well, considering Clarence Thomas and others on the Supreme Court don't either. Not sure why you'd want state jurists to follow it. The rule state judges may not personally make financial contributions to candidates seeking elected office, but campaign finance data shows Newby is among more than a dozen judges and judicial candidates who have ignored this prohibition. He's made 4 such donations since 2008, including one in 2022, when he was Chief Justice. Billy Corraher, the state court manager for the People's Parity Project, which advocates for what it calls progressive judicial reform, alerted ProPublica to Newby's contributions and described them as crystal clear violations. Newby didn't answer questions about his political contributions. Yeah, he can't answer because he knows that what he did was wrong. He claims that there's no evidence that he did anything wrong, but, you know, he knows. He just doesn't care. North Carolina judges hold sole authority over whether to recuse themselves from cases, but its judicial code advises them to do so when their impartiality may reasonably be questioned, including if they have a personal bias or prejudice concerning a party. Yet in late 2021, Newby wrote an opinion in an adoption case without disclosing his connection to one of the parties. Amazing Grace Adoptions, the anti-abortion adoption agency he founded in 1999. That explains why that agency was mentioned earlier in the article. He'd gone on to serve on the agency's board of directors and touted his connection to it during his 2004 Supreme Court campaign. His ties to the agency ended then, but experts in judicial ethics expressed surprise that Newby hadn't at least disclosed the relationship, even if he thought that he could rule impartially on the case, which he decided in Amazing Grace's favor. Why are we surprised at this point? Disclosing can mitigate the appearance of impropriety, said Jeremy Fogel, the executive director of the University of California, Berkeley Judicial Institute and a former federal judge. I think people ought to disclose. That's what I would have done. Yeah, but you're also ethical. The case involved the adoption agency wasn't the first Newby had decided despite having a potential conflict, according to experts and media reports. According to the Centers for Public Integrity, he ruled at least 6 times in cases involving Duke Energy or its subsidiaries while he and his wife held stock in the company, always siding with it. During that 8-year period, Newby's and his wife's shares were worth at least $10,000 each, according to his disclosure forms. He also authored 2 opinions on a federal agricultural program from which he, as a farm owner, had earned income, while disclosing his participation in the program in court. I guess kudos to him for at least admitting it. He still didn't recuse himself, but at least he admitted it. As Newby finished his 3rd term, his cumulative effect on democracy and justices in North Carolina stands out in bold relief. He's played a decisive role in the ongoing power struggle between the state's governor and General Assembly, which has intensified as Democrats have won the last 3 races for the governor's mansion. That's because as lawmakers had passed measure after measure transferring powers traditionally held by the governor to other parts of government controlled by Republicans, the governor has sought relief in the courts. But as the Chief Justice picks the 3 judges panel who hear these cases, since 2023, when Newby gained more power over this process, his picks have repeatedly upheld laws shrinking gubernatorial powers, as has Newby's conservative allies on the Court of Appeals. Collectively, these decisions have reduced the governor's control over a broad array of entities, including those responsible for regulating utilities, the environment, and building standards. This year, Newby helped Republicans wrest away control over what many saw as the most valuable prize, the state election board. The board had long been controlled by the governor, who appointed its members. After years of failed attempts to change this, in late 2024, the legislature passed a law giving the state auditor, a Republican, the power to make election board appointments. The governor filed a legal challenge, but Newby's court had the last word, affirming the Court of Appeals decisions permitting the takeover. The legislature had raised the mandatory retirement age from judges from 72 to 76. allowing Newby to complete his current term, but he's not expected to run again in 4 years. He will leave behind an intensely partisan, politicized court system in which elections are brutal slugfests. Hopefully, a lot of those people who were afraid of Newby will become less afraid. But maybe, it depends. How big is his shadow? Anyway, the most recent Supreme Court races ended after a 6-month legal battle that the Republican challenger, a Newby mentee, conceded only when a federal court, a venue beyond Newby's control, rejected his bid to toss out 65,000 ballots. Even with that loss, conservatives hold a durable advantage in North Carolina's judiciary. On the Supreme Court, they'll be in the majority until at least 2028, even if Democrats win every election between now and then, and much longer if they don't. Newby no longer bothers to have the members of the court deliberate together on important cases with political implications, according to sources familiar with the matter. Instead, the conservative majority just provides drafts of its decisions to the 2 Democratic justices. If conservative justices oppose Newby, sometimes they are cut out too. Again, mob boss behavior. The changes Newby has driven have turned North Carolina into a model for other states, providing a roadmap conservatives elsewhere have used to consolidate control over court systems. Oh my God, my nose is itchy. Ohio has followed North Carolina's lead and switched to partisan judicial elections, a move that's tilted courts in Republicans' favor. In Arizona and Georgia, where justices are appointed, not elected, lawmakers have expanded state Supreme Courts to allow Republican governors to add more conservatives. Which is what we want with the U.S. Supreme Court. We wanted Joe Biden to expand the freaking court. Big money judicial races increasingly have become the norm in other states as they have in North Carolina. Wisconsin saw the first $100 million state Supreme Court race in U.S. history in 2025, with Elon Musk alone spending $20 million on an unsuccessful attempt to swing the court back to Republican control, which was pretty much the beginning of the end for him. The fierce politicking has eroded Americans' confidence in the judiciary. According to a Gallup poll released in December, only 35% of respondents, a record low, said they trusted the courts, down from almost 60% in 2006. Some North Carolina Republicans, including Tillis, who see Newby's efforts largely as rebalancing the scales tilted by Democratic lawmakers a generation ago, acknowledge that the tactics that had put them into the political driver's seat may be destructive over the long haul. Really, you think? Tillis called partisan judicial elections a bad idea on a long-term basis. He's not running for re-election in 2026, after having clashed with Trump over health care cuts and concluding the current divisiveness had made it impossible to serve all of his constituents. Experts fear what will happen nationally if there is no reversal of course and the approach that Newby has pioneered becomes the norm. The distinct line between the judiciary, the legislature, and politics is blurring, says Charles Gay, a law professor at Indiana University Bloomington who specializes in judicial ethics. And if we don't preserve that, it'll be naked power all the way down. Okay, so that is the end of that article, and it ends on a cheery, cheery note. I believe that is all I have for this video, and so much for it being a shorter one. But with that, I will see you guys in the next one.